contributions to our communities. And I do acknowledge the family and friends of Austin. It must be a terribly difficult time, and that certainly is one of the key issues that bring us here today. With a new Foreign Minister, Mr. Bob Carr, who previously is a journalist, he should make this issue of Austin's freedom, right to travel, his top priority. How often? How often have we heard Mr. Carr, when he was a former Premier of New South Wales, when he was a lobbyist for Mallisons, when he was a lobbyist for Macquarie Group, he was out there spruiking the benefits of democracy and the great benefits of the freedom of the press. Well, now he has to stand up for it, and it clearly should be the first thing on his desk that he acts on. Because, and the Greens strongly back the supporters of today's rally and the Media Alliance in calling for the Australian government to put pressure on the Egyptian government to ensure that the trumped-up charges against Austin, his translator, and all those who are assisting him to be dropped. The issue of the return of the passport is clearly something Mr. Carr needs to act on. That should be returned to him immediately, and the Australian government shouldn't let up until that occurs. There's so many ways that the government can have a very, very hands-on approach to this. So certainly the Greens see the issue is about Austin and those who work with him closely. But as we know, this issue goes much further, largely because of the courageous work Austin was doing, particularly in reporting on the work of the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces. Some of the insidious actions of that body was what Austin had been exposing. And so much of that material was on his laptop, on the hard drive, on his files that were raided and taken by who knows the security forces that are giving backing to so much of the oppressive actions that occur in Egypt. And a real worry is that many of those contacts are also under threat now. We don't know exactly, but this is a great uncertainty because of the illegal activities that have been perpetrated since Austin was taken into custody in Mahalla. There is a wider area again too, and that is that the actions against Austin is being used to intimidate journalists around the world, journalists who want to report freely and have a right to do so in what is so critical in any democracy, and particularly when a democracy is developing. These rights need to be defended. It's why we're here today, and it's why we must really hammer Bob Carr in the early days when he is Foreign Minister that this needs to be a top priority. It's certainly something that I'll be taking up with my colleagues when Parliament sits next week. We, the Greens, need to make this an issue because right now it's not just about one Australian journalist, it's not just about Australian journalism, it's about what's happening in Egypt, and it's about how journalists work around the world. We're seeing an enormous threat to Julian Assange. The word that I'm hearing, my colleague Senator Scott Ludlam was in London for his court case, and he said there's a very real concern that he could very quickly, if the case goes against him, in Sweden, that he so quickly could end up in the United States. And that is a real worry, and it shows where we're in a very tenuous situation in how media is operating. Media that is truly independent is speaking freely about so many of the crimes that most people hear very little about. So I do congratulate Austin for the work that he's done, how he's handling this present situation, and let's all make sure we keep the pressure on the new Foreign Minister to make sure that we get a speedy resolution to Austin's case, so no longer can the Egyptian government use his situation to try and intimidate other journalists and make it harder for the world to give support to the democratic process and the workers and all the people of Egypt that are struggling for their own freedom and their own rights. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Lee. Our next speaker is Zainab Abdul-Nabi, who's a representative from the Bahraini Australian Youth Movement. And I think Lee touched on there that this case, the persecution of Austin, is very, very much about trying to intimidate journalists right across the Middle East and right across Australia. And Zainab will speak about the repression that's currently happening in Bahrain, and across the Middle East of journalists. And I think it's incumbent on Bob Carr, They like to talk about democracy when they invade Afghanistan. They like to talk about democracy when they invade Iraq. But their lips are sealed when people are being gunned down in the streets of Bahrain, or the repression that's currently taking place in Egypt. So it's wonderful that Zainab could come and talk to us today and talk about some of those conditions. She's also a journalist with SBS Radio. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming. My name is Zainab Abdullabi. I am a journalist from Bahrain. Actually, I was arrested 2 times in Bahrain because while I was practicing my work. Well, at the beginning, I would like just to demand the Egyptian government to release Austin. We all sympathize with him and we all drink from this cup, so we know how it means or what it means to be in jail or to be arrested because you are practicing your job. Well, at the beginning, I would like just to give a snapshot about Bahrain. Bahrain is a small island. It's in the Persian Gulf. The population is 1 million, and 70 people of Bahrain are Shias who have been discriminated against. We have been inspired by the uprising in the Middle East, by the downfall of dictatorships in Egypt and Tunisia. That's why we were demanding our rights. But our demanding have been met by bullets, live ammunition, tear gas, and 60 or 70 people have been killed so far. 4 people have been killed and are tortured, and they were journalists. Two of them have been killed in jail and are tortured. One of them is a founder of the main newspaper in Bahrain, an opposition newspaper, and he has been killed under torture. And other one is a blogger, and he has been killed under torture as well. And nobody has spoken about them. Nobody has spoken up about them. While people are crying and calling the Syrian government to respect human rights, nobody is calling for releasing the journalists, Bahraini journalists from jails. So we really are demanding to end the double standard policies. Like while you are demanding to release people from Syria and from Egypt, there is Bahraini journalists in Bahrain. There is Bahraini journalists who are being subjected to torture, heavily beaten. So we just need everybody to stand by us. Actually, 136 journalists have been or were subject to harassment or torture, or even they have been sacked from their jobs just because they have been protesting or participating in the uprising protest or demonstrations. So, I'm calling for all journalists here and the human rights organizations to stand by journalists in Bahrain, because nobody knows what's going on there. Nobody talks about them. So we really need your solidarity. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that. There's a number of Austin's friends here as well, people that he's known that have indicated that they'd like to speak. I think it'd be wonderful to hear from people some more about Austin and his work. Is David? Yeah. Thanks, mate. Cheers.
Well, I've been friends with Austin Mackell for 11 years. I met him maybe late 2000, early 2001. I'm a filmmaker, and he was in one of my films. He acted in it. This is before he ever became a journalist. And we became good mates. I acted in one of his little student films, and we've been friends ever since. And then we sort of lost track for a while. And when we reconnected after a number of years, all of a sudden he's a journalist and he's in the Middle East covering all this stuff. I'm like, dude, this is amazing. I'm so proud of you. Good on you. And then I find out that he's been arrested in Egypt, and I couldn't believe it. This guy, who was just this kid I used to know, who was in one of my films, now he's this veteran journalist in the middle of all this stuff. I just couldn't believe it. Austin Mackell isn't a criminal. He is not a criminal. He is not a terrorist. He's not an extremist, anything like that. What they're doing is basically, I think Patty pointed this out before, is that they're just trying to intimidate journalists, anybody there who speaks out about the government, because unfortunately Austin's working in a part of the world where the authorities don't like the idea of people speaking out or expressing themselves. They don't like this. They don't want people thinking for themselves. And Austin's over there, you know, trying to get the truth out, and that's all he's doing, is that he's